Sixth grade, welcome to 7.4 in your science book. Yesterday we talked about symbiotic relationships, and there's three type of relationships that are happening. One is parasitism, one is helped, one is harmed, one is commensalism, one is helped, the other one doesn't really care, and the last one is mutualism. Both are helped. So remember, symbiotic, at least one is helped. We talked about parasites living off the host, trying not to kill it because they're stealing nutrients from it. Today we're going to talk about God and His genius plan of material cycling through the ecosystem, and we're going to see why that's an absolute genius plan by our Lord to do those things. We're trying to answer the question, how do materials cycle through ecosystems? Nature depends on cycles so that the resources can be used over and over. Earth would quickly run out of resources if it were not recycled. Some important cycles in nature are the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the water cycle. Guys, lots of times we call this carbon cycle the carbon dioxide oxygen cycle, but carbon comes in a number of forms besides just carbon dioxide. That's why it's just the carbon cycle right now. Okay, we'll get started with just 2 paragraphs on why it's important that we recycle matter, and then we'll go through these 3 different cycles. Chances are that your home and school recycle some of the materials they use. You might recycle paper, plastic, glass. Nature, too, has a recycling system. Like energy, the amount of matter on Earth is limited. So number 1, energy and matter are limited on this Earth. We're not making more of a lot of this matter that we're talking about. In other words, the soil is the soil. Can we make new soil? Absolutely, guys. But it's not like the Earth is going to get 3 times bigger over time so that we can just have more and more soil kind of things is what they're getting at. But unlike energy that flows through an ecosystem in only one direction, so number 2, energy is only moving in one direction. We talked about that in lesson 3, guys, as we use up the energy. Many of Earth's resources pass through ecosystems in a continuous cycle. Number 3 in your notes. If important materials that organisms need, such as nitrogen, water, carbon, and oxygen, number 4 in your notes, were not cycled, they would soon run out. Because of Earth cycles, organisms can use the same materials over and over. 3 important cycles are the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the water cycle. So guys, without this cycles, we would instantly run out of oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water. God in His genius says, I'm going to have that water just constantly go through the system. So water is going to rain down, plants are going to absorb it, plants are going to transpire, that's going to put the water back out, back up into the cloud, rains back down, and the plant can actually use the same water over and over and over again as these cycles work. Okay, the first one we're going to go through is the nitrogen cycle. I would say this is the least common cycle that we know about, but also a very important one. One of the most important resources for all living things is nitrogen. It is the main component of protein, number 5 in your notes, which is a building block of your cells. Nitrogen is a common element in Earth's air. In fact, the air is about 78% nitrogen, number 6 in your notes. But it is what we call free nitrogen. That means that it is not combined with other elements. Most organisms need nitrogen that is fixed. What does it mean to be fixed? It means it can be combined with other elements. So number 7 in your notes. So guys, my body needs nitrogen, but I can't get it by breathing. You breathe in 78% of the air you breathe in has nitrogen. It sits in your lungs. When you breathe back out, you're just breathing that nitrogen right back out, okay? So we take in oxygen, which is about 21% of the air. Our body uses a percentage of that, guys, and then we breathe that nitrogen, that carbon dioxide, that oxygen right back out of our body when we breathe. But the nitrogen our body doesn't use at all through breathing. So how do we get the nitrogen that we need? Let's talk about it. Most free nitrogen is fixed by, number 1, bacteria that live in the soil. Okay? So we're cruising through number 8 here. It's bacteria that lives in the soil. Some bacteria live in nodules. Boom, that's what we're talking about here. The description of it in this picture of it. Nodules, which are the bumps on certain plant roots. So this is B right here. The bacteria get food from the plant, and the plant absorbs fixed nitrogen from the bacteria. I wrote down mutualism, guys. They're both getting a benefit from that, from the stuff that we talked about yesterday. You can see them spelling it out for you right there in mutualistic relationships. Animals then get nitrogen by eating plants or by eating prey that have eaten plants. So this plant right here is growing. A cow comes along, eats this plant. It gets the fixed nitrogen in this plant by eating it. I come along and I eat the steak from a cow. I just got the fixed nitrogen that went from the plant to the cow, now to me. That's what they're saying is the one way we can get it. Corn plant has the bacteria that it's absorbed it. The corn plant now has fixed nitrogen. I come around and I eat the corn, I get the fixed nitrogen that way. So that's how humans lots of times get the fixed nitrogen that it needs, because I'm not living off of the bacteria in the soil kind of things. Okay. Continuing on in picture form, fixed nitrogen may enter the soil in other ways too. A small amount of free nitrogen in the air is fixed by lightning. It is then carried to the ground by rainfall. Fixed nitrogen also enters the soil because of decomposers. Decomposers break down dead organisms and the fixed nitrogen is released into the soil. This fixed nitrogen can be absorbed by plant roots. So lightning goes, it rains down, the plant absorbs the fixed nitrogen. This animal drops over dead, breaks down, plants absorb its nutrients, including its fixed nitrogen. Okay, so we're constantly recycling this both ways. Okay, so that sounds to me, everything we talk about now is how free nitrogen becomes fixed. That means we're going to run out of free nitrogen pretty soon. Wait a minute, how do we recycle it? Last paragraph here. How does nitrogen return to the air? Some bacteria live freely in the soil. These bacteria can break down fixed nitrogen into free nitrogen, number 9 in your notes. This free nitrogen eventually enters the air and the cycle continues. This movement of the nitrogen through the ecosystem is called the nitrogen cycle. So I got nitrogen that's free becoming fixed, and I got fixed nitrogen in the soil that is becoming free, and around and around and around we go, switching the nitrogen that we need into the uses that we have. Cycle number 1, nitrogen. Turning the page, the carbon cycle, one we might be slightly more familiar with. The most common element in all living things is carbon. Number 10 in your notes. Don't get confused with nitrogen. Nitrogen is very common, guys. It's one of the most important resources. It's very common in air. But the most common element that is found in all living things is carbon. For example, about 18% of your body is carbon. Earth's atmosphere, rocks, and soil contain carbon. Like nitrogen, carbon is cycled through the ecosystem. Carbon is cycled during photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Letter A in your notes. Guys, we talked about this process. Plants take in carbon dioxide. They give off oxygen. In cellular respiration, plants and animals use oxygen to break down energy and give off carbon dioxide. So this is one huge way that stuff is happening, simply photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Now, I like the picture here, guys, because they have Mr. Deer here, respiration, breathing, giving it off. They also have Mr. Pine Tree here, respiration, giving it off. They also have photosynthesis happening from those trees to get it there. Okay, that's not all of them. Let's move on. It is cycled through the environment in other ways too. When decomposers such as fungi and bacteria break down waste and bodies of dead organisms, carbon is released into the soil to be used again by living organisms. Okay, so it gets released into the soil, guys, as they break down dead things. Organisms that do not decompose can be buried, and over time this forms fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. The carbon that was stored in these organisms when they were alive is then released into the air when the fuels are burned. So when we burn fossil fuels, guys, this is sometimes the big thing. We're burning so many fossil fuels, this is called global warming. What's global warming? Releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide traps heat. And so even when the plants are not reused, they form fossil fuels, and then we're going to burn those. Carbon is also released into the air as carbon dioxide gas when volcanoes erupt. Okay, extra credit choice number 1. I have heard this, that when a volcano erupts, it causes as much carbon dioxide into the air as is if you drove a electric car instead of a gas car for 5 years. So, in other words, we're saying, hey, how can we save the planet? Let's all switch to electric cars. And science says that's awesome, but you can't stop volcanoes from erupting. And when volcanoes erupt, it produces a ton of carbon dioxide into the air. So, if you want extra credit, you find out how much. You say, Mr. Bauer, a volcano puts 500 tons of carbon dioxide into the air. See what it takes to be able to get it there. But I heard the sad thing of, as far as saving a planet goes, volcanoes are a tough thing for us, guys. We can't do that. They cause a lot of problems. Okay, you have your little pictures here of fossil fuels being burned, fossil fuels being formed. We decompose these things, voila. Let's get the last cycle. You're probably familiar with this one too. Can you imagine a day without water? Water is necessary for all life. Many chemical reactions take place in the organisms that keep us alive need water. The water cycle helps us make water available to all parts of the ecosystem. As the sun heats lakes, streams, and other bodies of water, water evaporates. What does evaporation mean? It means it changes from a liquid to a gas. As water evaporates, the gas is formed. This gas is called water vapor, number 11 in your notes. That enters the air. Water also enters the air when the leaves of plants give off water through the process of transpiration. We talked about that a couple chapters ago. And every time you breathe or any other animal breathes, it also contains water. How do you know your breath contains water? Extra credit. You breathe, it fogs up the mirror, and then you draw your little smiley face in the mirror. Boom, that's you breathing out water vapor, guys, and it condensing. Okay, once water enters the air, it rises and cools. The cooler temperature causes the water to condense. What is condensation? Condensation is changing water, which is a gas, back to tiny droplets of water. So I wrote condensation, gas goes back to a liquid. So I put liquid in there. Clouds form when the water vapors condense on dust or salt particles in the air. Water then returns to Earth's surface as precipitation, such as rain, snow, or hail. So you have your beautiful picture here, guys. The steps of a water cycle, which will be asked on your worksheet and then also on your test. I evaporate, I'm in a gas. As I get higher, it cools. That causes it to condense. As it condenses, it falls back to the earth as precipitation. So these three words, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, are the main words of the water cycle. We added transpiration, guys, because plants can give off water that way, but they left off respiration, you and me breathing. Water eventually is going to make its way to lakes where the process continues, okay? So continuous process here to get us the resources we need. God's a genius. We'll keep using it over and over and over again so that our planet continues. Awesome, 6th grade. You got lesson 4. You have a worksheet on it. Take your time on that one and think carefully. The answers are in your notes and obviously in your book, but don't go too fast on that and get tripped up. I tried to highlight some of those in the video to give you a chance on it, but think through those things. Like I'm thinking number 8, plants use directly from the atmosphere. Okay, plants use both of those guys. Which one is coming directly out of the atmosphere? I'm thinking carbon because I'm taking that right out of the air for photosynthesis. Plants get the water they need not from the atmosphere, but from pulling it up from the soil in their roots, guys. Okay, if we could just get water right out of the air, I wouldn't need roots in a plant. So be careful with that test. Good, you got number 8 done. Have a great day.